Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. The Newman Ranch had seen more than its share of family battles, betrayals, celebrations, and heartbreaking emergencies over the years. But nothing could have prepared Victor Newman for the terrifying moment when Nikki suddenly collapsed in his arms, leaving him staring at the woman he loved with a fear he rarely allowed anyone to see. The evening had begun quietly enough, with the ranch unusually peaceful after several days of family tension. Yet Victor could sense that something was wrong with Nikki long before she admitted it. She had been moving more slowly than usual, occasionally pressing her fingers to her temple and insisting that she was simply tired. Victor watched her carefully from across the living room, noticing the way she seemed to lose focus in the middle of conversations and how she repeatedly reached for the edge of a chair as though the room were shifting beneath her feet. Nikki tried to laugh off his concern, telling him that the Newman family had survived enough drama lately and that she refused to become another reason for everyone to panic. But Victor was not convinced. He knew his wife too well. Nikki was stubborn when it came to her own health, especially when she believed the family needed her strength, and Victor had learned over decades of loving her that the moment she insisted everything was fine was often the moment he needed to worry the most. He moved toward her and quietly asked whether she had eaten anything, whether she had taken her medication, and whether she had experienced any dizziness earlier in the day. Nikki became irritated by the questions and told him to stop treating her as though she were fragile, but even as she said the words, her voice weakened. Victor's expression changed instantly. He reached for her hand and realized her fingers were cold. "Sweetheart, sit down," he urged, but Nikki shook her head, determined to prove she could walk across the room without help. She took only 2 steps before everything changed. Nikki suddenly stopped, her eyes widening as though the world around her had disappeared. Her hand went to her nose, and when she pulled it away, there was blood on her fingertips. Victor froze for half a second before rushing toward her. Nikki stared at the blood with confusion, whispered Victor's name, and then her knees gave way beneath her. Victor caught her before she struck the floor, wrapping both arms around her and lowering her carefully against the sofa. "Nikki, Nikki, look at me," he shouted, his powerful voice breaking with panic. For a man who had built an empire by remaining in control, the sight of Nikki lying weak and unconscious against his chest shattered every defense he had. A thin line of blood continued beneath her nose as Victor cupped her face, begging her to open her eyes. Nikki responded only with a faint sound, her breathing shallow but steady. Victor immediately grabbed his phone and called emergency services, demanding an ambulance be sent to the ranch without delay. He gave the address sharply, his voice trembling with anger and terror when the dispatcher tried to slow him down and ask questions. "My wife collapsed. She is bleeding. You send someone now. Do you understand me?" Victor barked before forcing himself to listen as the dispatcher instructed him to keep Nikki still and monitor her breathing. He lowered the phone briefly and pressed his forehead against hers, whispering that she was going to be all right. "You stay with me, baby. You hear me? You are not leaving me." Nikki's eyelids fluttered, and for one hopeful second Victor believed she might regain consciousness. She tried to speak, but the words were too weak to understand. Victor tightened his arm around her, his other hand shaking as he wiped the blood carefully from beneath her nose with a handkerchief. The sight of that blood terrified him because he knew it could mean something far more serious than exhaustion. He had faced ruthless business rivals, dangerous criminals, family betrayals, and near-death situations of his own, yet none of those threats frightened him as deeply as the possibility of losing Nikki. The sound of sirens approaching the ranch finally broke the silence. Within minutes, paramedics rushed through the front door carrying medical equipment while Victor remained beside Nikki, refusing to let go until they told him they needed room to examine her. One paramedic checked Nikki's pulse, while another measured her blood pressure and oxygen level. Their concerned expressions did nothing to calm Victor. He demanded answers immediately, but they explained that they could not determine the cause of the collapse without tests at the hospital. When one paramedic asked whether Nikki had complained about headaches, dizziness, chest pain, confusion, or unusual weakness recently, Victor hesitated. He remembered several moments from the previous days that he had dismissed because Nikki herself had insisted they were nothing. She had forgotten where she placed her phone. She had complained that the lights in the living room seemed too bright. She had paused on the staircase one morning because she suddenly felt unsteady. Victor's stomach tightened as he realized the warning signs might have been there all along. He admitted everything he could remember, and the paramedic exchanged a serious look with his partner. Victor immediately demanded to know what that look meant, but again they refused to speculate. Nikki began to stir as they prepared the stretcher, opening her eyes just enough to see Victor beside her. "Victor," she whispered weakly. He grabbed her hand. "I'm right here, sweetheart." Nikki looked frightened and confused. She asked what had happened, and Victor told her she had fainted, and they were taking her to the hospital. Nikki tried to protest, saying she did not need a hospital, but another wave of dizziness stopped her before she finished the sentence. Victor leaned closer and told her that for once she was going to listen to him. "You scared the hell out of me, Nikki. You are going." She stared at him, seeing the fear in his eyes, and finally stopped arguing. As the paramedics wheeled her toward the ambulance, Victor walked beside the stretcher, never releasing her hand. The drive to the hospital felt endless. Victor sat beside Nikki in the ambulance, watching every monitor as though he could somehow understand the numbers better than the medical professionals surrounding her. Each beep made his heart pound harder. Nikki drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally squeezing Victor's fingers. Every time she moved, he leaned toward her and reassured her that he was there. At Genoa City Memorial, Nikki was rushed through the emergency department while Victor was forced to remain outside the treatment room. That was when the full weight of what had happened finally hit him. Victor stood alone in the corridor, Nikki's blood still visible on the cuff of his shirt, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. For several minutes, he did not call anyone. He simply stared through the glass doors as doctors and nurses moved around Nikki's bed. Then his protective instincts returned. He called Victoria first. She answered immediately, expecting perhaps another family or business problem, but Victor's voice told her this was different. "Your mother is in the hospital," he said quietly. Victoria's entire tone changed. She asked what happened, and Victor explained that Nikki had collapsed at the ranch and suffered a nosebleed. Victoria told him she was coming immediately. Victor then called Nick, who was dealing with his own complicated struggles, but forgot everything else when he heard the fear in his father's voice. Nick promised he would meet them there. Adam was harder for Victor to contact, but eventually word spread throughout the Newman family, and soon everyone understood that Nikki's condition might be serious. Victoria arrived first, almost running down the hospital corridor. She found Victor standing alone with his hands on his hips, staring toward Nikki's room. Victoria immediately hugged him, something Victor accepted without hesitation. "How is she?" Victoria asked. Victor shook his head. "They won't tell me anything yet." Victoria looked through the doors and saw her mother surrounded by medical staff. Fear filled her expression. She asked whether Nikki had complained about anything earlier, and Victor repeated what he had told the paramedics. Victoria became worried because she also remembered Nikki mentioning headaches recently. She had assumed they were caused by stress. Now she wondered whether the family had all missed something important. Nick arrived soon afterward, carrying the same worried expression. Despite every conflict the Newmans had faced, the possibility of losing Nikki instantly united them. Nick put his hand on Victor's shoulder and quietly asked whether his father was holding up. Victor turned toward him with anger that was really fear. "I should have forced her to see a doctor days ago." Nick immediately told him not to blame himself. Nikki had a history of hiding when something was wrong because she hated worrying the family. Victor knew Nick was right, but guilt remained. A doctor finally emerged and asked to speak with the family. Victor stepped forward so quickly that Victoria had to follow closely behind him. The doctor explained that Nikki's vital signs had stabilized, but they were running several tests because sudden collapse combined with bleeding and neurological symptoms could have multiple causes. They wanted imaging, blood work, cardiac monitoring, and additional examinations before making any diagnosis. Victor's jaw tightened. "Is she going to be all right?" The doctor carefully replied that Nikki was stable, but that they needed answers before making promises. Victor hated those words. Stable was not enough. He wanted certainty. He wanted someone to tell him Nikki would walk out of the hospital with him. The doctor allowed Victor to see her briefly while they waited for results. Nikki looked pale beneath the hospital lights, but she was awake. Victor entered the room quietly and sat beside her bed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Nikki finally gave him a faint smile and told him he looked terrible. Victor almost laughed, but emotion caught in his throat. "You scared me to death," he said. Nikki apologized, but Victor shook his head. "Don't you apologize. Just get well." Nikki reached for his hand. She admitted she had been feeling strange for several days, but believed it would pass. Victor became frustrated, asking why she had not told him. Nikki answered that he already had too much to worry about with the family. Victor looked at her with disbelief. "There is nothing in this world more important to me than you." The emotion in his voice silenced her. For all their explosive arguments, separations, reconciliations, and impossible history, the bond between Victor and Nikki remained the center of both their lives. Nikki squeezed his hand and promised she would stop hiding things from him. Victor leaned down and kissed her forehead, then noticed the bruised appearance beneath her eyes and felt fear rise again. Nikki asked him not to scare the children, but Victor told her they were already on their way. She sighed, knowing there was no stopping the Newman family once an emergency began. Outside Nikki's room, however, another complication was developing. Victoria had started asking questions about Nikki's recent stress level, and Adam's name inevitably entered the conversation. Nikki had been deeply troubled by the growing conflict surrounding Christian and Adam's increasing role in the boy's life. Victoria wondered whether emotional pressure could have contributed to Nikki's collapse, but Nick immediately rejected the idea of blaming anyone before they knew the medical facts. Victor overheard the argument when he stepped back into the corridor and warned everyone that Nikki needed peace, not another Newman war. Yet privately, he could not stop thinking about everything Nikki had been carrying.
She worried about Nick.
She worried about Victoria. She worried about Adam. She worried about every grandchild and every crisis that touched the family. Nikki often acted as the emotional center of the Newmans, and Victor realized how much weight she carried silently. Soon Adam arrived, cautious about entering the family circle during such a vulnerable moment. Victoria looked at him coldly, while Nick remained neutral. Victor stared at his son for several seconds, but did not start a fight. Adam asked whether Nikki was all right. Victor replied that they did not know yet. Adam genuinely seemed concerned, and that unsettled Victoria, who had expected defensiveness. Adam quietly admitted that he and Nikki had argued earlier in the week and said he hoped their confrontation had not added to her stress. Victor's eyes hardened, but Nick stepped between them verbally before the conversation could explode. "Not here," Nick said firmly. Victor agreed. Whatever anger they felt could wait. Nikki's condition was all that mattered. Hours passed as doctors completed tests. The family gathered in the waiting area, each member reacting differently. Victoria paced. Nick stared at his phone without reading anything on the screen. Adam stood apart from everyone, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to leave. Victor refused to sit for long. Every few minutes, he returned to Nikki's door and looked through the glass. Finally, the doctor returned with preliminary results. He explained that the initial brain imaging did not reveal the catastrophic event they had feared, which brought immediate relief. But Nikki's blood pressure had reached a dangerously high level before stabilizing, and some blood test results required additional investigation. There were signs that her body had been under severe strain. The nosebleed could have been connected to the blood pressure spike, but the doctor wanted to rule out several neurological and cardiovascular issues before discharge. Nikki would remain overnight for observation and further testing. Victor asked whether she had suffered a stroke. The doctor said the initial scan did not show evidence of a major stroke, but that they were still evaluating transient neurological symptoms. Victoria exhaled shakily. Nick closed his eyes briefly in relief. Victor, however, remained focused on the phrase "still evaluating." He thanked the doctor and immediately returned to Nikki's room. Nikki was more alert now and complained that everyone was making too much of the situation. Victor sat beside her and told her that she was not leaving the hospital until every doctor in the building agreed she was safe. Nikki raised an eyebrow and reminded him that he did not own the hospital. Victor replied, "Not yet," which finally made her laugh softly. That small laugh gave Victor more relief than any medical update had. Yet the emotional calm did not last long. Nikki suddenly became serious and asked Victor what would happen if something really was wrong with her. Victor refused to entertain the question, but Nikki insisted. She told him she had spent years surviving battles that should have broken her, and she knew better than anyone that life could change without warning. She wanted Victor to promise he would keep the family together if she became seriously ill. Victor shook his head.
Don't talk like that.
Nikki continued, saying Victoria needed him even when she pretended she did not. Nick needed stability despite his struggles, and even Adam needed his father more than either of them admitted. Victor stood and walked toward the window because he could not let Nikki see how much her words affected him. "You're talking as though you're saying goodbye," he said. Nikki quietly answered that she was not saying goodbye. She simply wanted him to hear her, while she could say these things clearly. Victor turned back toward her, his eyes filled with emotion. "You listen to me. You and I have survived too much for this to be the end. We fought everybody, including each other. We survived alcoholism, enemies, kidnappings, heartbreak, betrayals, and everything else life threw at us. You think a little hospital room is going to defeat Nikki Newman? Not a chance." Nikki smiled through tears. Victor returned to her bedside and held her hand. "You're going home with me." Outside, Victoria overheard enough of the conversation to become emotional herself. She stepped away before either parent noticed and found Nick in the hallway. Victoria admitted that seeing Nikki collapse emotionally frightened her more than she expected. Nick told her their mother had always seemed indestructible, which made any sign of vulnerability difficult to accept. Victoria leaned against the wall and whispered that the entire family depended on Nikki more than they realized. Nick agreed. He also expressed concern that Victor might become impossible if Nikki's condition turned out to be serious. "Dad deals with fear by trying to control everything," Nick said. Victoria replied that they would handle him if necessary, but both knew that when it came to Nikki, Victor's control disappeared quickly. Later that night, another doctor visited Nikki with new information. One blood marker remained abnormal, and they wanted a specialist to review her case in the morning. Victor immediately demanded details, but the doctor explained that the abnormality did not automatically mean something catastrophic. They needed additional tests. Nikki noticed Victor's expression and told him not to jump to the worst conclusion. Yet after the doctor left, Victor walked into the hallway and called his private medical contacts, determined to bring in the best specialists available. Nikki caught him when he returned and accused him of trying to take over her medical care. Victor did not deny it. "You are my wife. I will bring every doctor in this country here if I have to." Nikki told him she wanted competent doctors, not an army. Victor replied that she was getting both. Their familiar argument brought warmth back into the room, but beneath the teasing was a fear neither wanted to fully acknowledge. Close to midnight, Nikki finally fell asleep. Victor remained beside her, sitting in a chair with one hand resting over hers. He watched the monitor, listening to its steady rhythm, and allowed himself to remember their entire history together. He thought about the first time he realized Nikki was different from every other woman in his life. He remembered their weddings, their separations, the ranch, the children, and the countless moments when circumstances had pulled them apart only for them to find their way back together. Victor had spent his life building power because he believed power created security. Yet sitting beside Nikki's hospital bed, he knew none of his companies, money, influence, or victories mattered if he could not protect the woman lying in front of him.